Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. People will be joining as we go along. Norma has just recorded the session for those people that are not able to attend today. So I want to welcome everyone here. We're really excited. My name is Yvonne Kaplan-Liss. I'm the director of the Center for Compassionate Communication. It's one of 6 centers of the T. Denny Sanford Institute for Empathy and Compassion. I'm a physician and I like to say a recovering journalist. And I have spent the last 15 years of my career working with Val, who you'll meet in a second, um, creating curriculum and teaching and training others to communicate with compassion. We came to UC San Diego about 5 years ago to start a Train the program and develop and teach workshops to external audiences. So today we have UCSD participants, but I'm happy to say we have participants from all over the country, some of them from out of the country, representing clinicians and educators and researchers and students and nurses and all different disciplines. So I'm going to toss it to Val to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Val Lansgeffro. As Yvonne said, I've been working with her as a collaborative partnership for 15 years. My background, other than science and medical communication, began in theater. I was an actor and a director and teacher. I suppose I still am. But the lens that I bring to this practice has to do with how you connect to the story of your work, how you engage an audience and become adaptable in your message, and how you structure the story that you're going to share about your research. So I'm excited to work with you today. When we came to UCSD, we met some amazing people. And one of those has become another partner in crime, if you will. So I'm going to throw the baton now to you, Gary, to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Val. I'm Gary Buckles. I'm one of the palliative care physicians at UCSD. I've been in clinical practice for a little over 20 years. And about 3 years ago, I was invited to participate in a pilot faculty fellowship on compassionate communication with Yvonne and Val leading. And it was transformational for me. After that, I was invited on board to help evolve this faculty fellowship program. It's now an interprofessional faculty fellowship program, and we have 85 graduates of that program that has a 60-hour curriculum. So now I oversee our affiliate faculty after they've graduated that program. And I'll throw the baton to Norma.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Norma Nava. I am the admin for the Center for Compassion Communication, and I'll be helping facilitate today's webinar. I'm also the main point of contact for the center, so if you have any questions after the session, feel free to contact me via email. This will be an interactive session, so please feel free to share your thoughts when invited to do so. If you have any questions along the way, drop them in the Q&A chat. We'll make sure to get to them at the end. Thank you for being here. We're excited to get started. Passing it back to Yvonne.
Thanks, Norma. So the title of our presentation is Mastering the Art of Communicating Your Research. And our objectives today are to discover techniques to communicate your message to the public. These are techniques that we've developed over our 15 years of working together. And we're going to practice those tools and structures that lead to clarity and audience-specific messaging.
And since we're thinking about audience-specific messaging, we thought we might start with one message about the brain. So we're going to share this. I hope that I've shared sound correctly. If I haven't, Yvonne, let me know and I'll reshare.
Well, the Kots and the Tempertones merk the gluposes and overclock the mergerchooses. There's to Vidas Crucible and part of occurs together T mood sliver the antipedity, so fourth frame shows data vision and auditory slow perfection. Resumptive friction induces corresponding blip mortalizers, but that all comes out of Kroner's electropyramidal saltification, which you will underlie in our professor course. Now, resumptive friction and multicentric compulator superless the alleviating Dutch intermediary lubble Dutch, making contace and together slib temperance and expectancy. Reflection inertia corresponds to Hugo Bevertz's supercredited valence multiplicator equation, E equals 2R. I'll say that again, E equals 2R, where R is the radiance of a home measure of the valedictory factor. Now, pavionary stems are parabolic and parasylton, and reflector lucidity overleases the homovesery and heterovandal effect, so that neglectance of Mermat's atmospheric supercontraction causes structure mention of faction cavity there.
A little science communication to start the day.
So we're trying not to sound like that, and we're going to work on that today. And the process that we'll be sharing are good for many things. And we're going to focus today on an elevator pitch, which usually is around 2 minutes. It's a message you want to get across to somebody because you want to convince them of something. You want to share some knowledge, but you don't really have a long time. So you have to craft that in a specific way, and we'll go over that. But the process is also good for speaking to funders. I'm sure a lot of you have to deal with funders, and it's not like talking to your colleague. There's a different purpose for that. I see I'm frozen, so I'm gonna, okay. Val, you can still hear?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay. Another process is speaking to the media. And that could be through an interview, a television interview, or in the written word. But this would be a tool you can use for that as well. And use it as a template for writing an article that you want to write for the public. And it focuses on framing the big picture first. And so that's a really good tool when you're sitting down to develop a presentation for all types of audiences, to really think about it, what the big picture message you want to get across. And also helpful to organize your thoughts for any communication with the lay public. So we're going to ask you to complete a poll, give you about 30 seconds. And the question we'd like you to respond to is, what are your challenges communicating with a lay public? Okay. Norma's going to tell us when the results come through.
Gonna give it 10 more seconds. Looks like 5 more people need to answer. Okay. So this is just shared the results.
Thank you, Norma. So, so the largest percent we're dealing with different levels of understanding, which is a challenge when you have a mixed audience. And then the others are pretty evenly split. Seems impossible to explain without using jargon, and I'm afraid of dumbing it down, and not even family understand what I do. In the chat,
Brookie shared, I can explain my work simply, but it always leads to caveats and more explanations because it is in fact very complex. And Steve shared, my other would have to do with stigma and working to inform people.
yeah. So these are all very common. And what we're going to work on today really is about distilling your message. And it's talking about your work and why it matters in clear, vivid, conversational language that your audience understands.
So your audience can vary, and we're going to work on a couple of different audiences today, but we wanted to sort of zoom out and think about the public. This is a research from 2023, and we want to acknowledge that things feel very different at this moment than they did in 2023. But as of 2023, the news was pretty good. And I want to remind you all that that was post-COVID, when there was a lot of controversy, a lot of misinformation, but still by 2023, there was pretty decent confidence in science and scientists. A clear majority of US adults, 77%, as of September 22, expressed at least a fair amount of confidence in scientists. And probably not surprising, US adults who demonstrate greater understanding of scientific logic tend to express more trust in scientists to act in the best interests of society than those who express less understanding. I'm guessing that these results are not surprising to you. But let's fast forward to where we are today.
So we have a picture of an elephant in the room because things have clearly changed since 2022 and 2023, and we just need to acknowledge that, in the room. We're all experiencing this differently, some in terms of funding being pulled or other restraints on their research or even their messaging. So just to be aware of that in our situations, and it's all individual. So the tools that we're going to talk about are foundational tools of clear and effective communication. It may be the words you choose or things you have to do at your own institutions may be different based on what's been going on in our world. So here's a picture of Ted Koppel, because my job out of journalism school was working for Ted Koppel. And I always say my best education in terms of treating my patients and communicating with patients and colleagues is what I learned as a journalism student and in practice, especially when I was working with Ted. And these are some of the general things that I learned. We're going to dig deeper into it, but the most important first thing is always to know who your audience is. And every audience is different. So we're going to talk about that. You must have a goal in mind when you're setting out to communicate something, especially in your elevator pitch, because it's short and sweet. We're going to talk about starting with the big picture, because that really matters and provides context for a listener that's not part of your language and your discipline. The importance of removing jargon, and we all have jargon in our fields, something that our colleagues will understand, but somebody outside the discipline won't. It doesn't just happen in science and medicine. Our mechanic will talk to us, and we may not understand what they're saying. The ordering of information, really important. We're going to talk about the lead, spelled LEDE, which is the language, the jargon we use in journalism. Clarity is bolstered by vivid language and analogy. We're going to give you some examples of that. And when possible, put a face on it. Story is memorable.
We thought we'd think for a minute about how to make something memorable, and that comes out of relevance. We remember what we understand. So I'm going to do a little experiment with all of you. This is interactive, so listen closely. I am going to play a recording of me clapping. I can't do it live because that sound doesn't work on Zoom, so I have a recording. I'm going to play this recording of me clapping out a song that probably all of you know. And after the song, Norma is going to put up a poll that determines whether or not you were able to guess the song. So listen first and then answer the poll that Norma puts up. Good. So again, that's a song that probably all of you know, and Norma just put up the poll. So just answer that poll. Now, as you're answering, I want you to think for a second. If you answered no, here's a question for you. Did you, in your mind, try to make that song into either Happy Birthday or the national anthem? So this is pretty common. When we hear something that we don't understand, we try to fit it into something that we do understand. Here's another question. How many of you who couldn't identify the song gave up even listening? So that happens too when we don't get something, and it happens really quickly. This recording was only 22 seconds. Norma, do you have the results of that poll? 100% could not identify this song that you probably all know. So this is an experiment that we've done that's taken from an amazing book called Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. We really recommend that you read this book. So it references something called the curse of knowledge. And this is what happens when we know something so well that we forget what it was not to know. And this happens very, very quickly. So let me illustrate that. The song that you just heard was Hey Jude. So let me play that song again, or that recording again, and see if you can hear it. You hear it now? So your goal in communicating is to step away from what you know and consider instead what your audience knows. Start there. Otherwise, all they'll hear will be the metaphorical clapping, and they'll either stop listening or they'll try to make that information fit into something else that they know, which may or may not be accurate.
So how do we overcome the curse of knowledge? And we're going to start with trying to understand who our audience is, because like Val said, you need to understand where they're at so we can communicate effectively with them. And this is something you need to do in advance. And it's a lot, it's hard work. And sometimes you can't figure out who it is. Like, for example, this webinar, I don't know you, but I did make sure that I looked at, we had 150 people that registered. So I made sure I looked at what your backgrounds were and your positions of where you were, what part of the country you were from, just to give me some idea of is this a more clinical audience? Is this a more research audience? In this case, it's a complete mix. And as you guys showed as the biggest challenge is a mixed audience is a huge challenge because you want to try to reach everybody. And it takes time. So if you're invited to a presentation, the person that invited you, they probably know the people that are in the audience, so you should ask them and really hone in on what is the most important things that are important to them, and in terms of what your topic is, and find out more so you can then craft your message and your presentation. And try to imagine being in the audience, in their shoes. What is it that they're struggling with, right? So for example, we put up an elephant in the room slide because we could have given you those statistics, but we know personally that you're all affected differently than what's going on right now. We may not be able to give answers to each and every one of you, but at least we acknowledge the elephant in the room. So that's an example of trying to understand where you're all coming from. And what is your worldview? What's your perspective? And how do we connect? Think of ways that you can best connect with that particular audience. So how do we engage our audience to try and connect with them? Always keeping your message simple, which doesn't mean dumbing it down, but find the core ideas and stick to them. We're going to work on that. capture the attention by emphasizing the unexpected. So that's what's so good about a story, right? A story well told is not a story that you know what the ending's going to be necessarily, or the path to get there. For example, I'm watching a television series with my son the other day, and he said, I know exactly how this is going to end. I don't want to watch anymore. So we shut it off, and he was absolutely right. It was no twists, no turns. There was nothing unexpected to keep us engaged. Use metaphors, analogies. I briefly mentioned stories and examples to conjure up vivid imagery. So it's not just your senses of hearing. We want to entice your imagination, or maybe even a smell or some other of your senses through the use of these metaphors and analogies and things that you can relate to, so we can connect better with you. And then authentic emotion can be engaging. We don't ask you, well, this is where you should start crying. That's not what we mean. We just mean that be human and be authentic, because just like, as a physician and as a patient, I can tell if my physician is being authentic or is checking off the boxes and saying what they think they need to say. So being authentic, it's my favorite word. Val knows that. Authenticity is key to all of this. So we're not giving you an add water and stir recipe, because there is none. If you want to engage, be authentic and connect. But if there is real emotion involved, and it doesn't mean crying, it could be excitement, it could be anything. Sometimes we feel we can't share. It may be an appropriate moment to do it. So this is my favorite slide. So I'm a visual person, so I take photos and and that's how I remember things. So I have a picture of this in my head, and I always think about this when I'm ready to sit down with whichever audience I am and which way I need to communicate with them. So if I'm communicating with fellow scientists or pediatricians like myself who know my jargon, who know my message, maybe it's more appropriate to be communicating the way it is on the left side, which is the green triangle, the scientists. Because what we do when we write a scientific article, or if we listen to a presentation, the way we do this, the way an abstract of a paper is written, is it's the background first, the supporting details, and if they're still awake, the results and the conclusions. Now, the people most likely to be awake are the people that understand what I'm talking about. My colleagues, my friends, my partners in crime. But if you're communicating with a different audience outside of your discipline, then we flip that triangle, and that's the orange triangle on the right. And this is how a journalist communicates. We focus first on the bottom line. That's the most important thing. Why that audience is reading that article. Why is that audience coming to your presentation? That comes up at the top, because it's about them. Why are they there and why do they care? Once you've got them, then you can give them the so what. And because they're still awake, they're interested in the supporting details. So here's an example. Here's an article. I'm being blocked. Okay. Here's an article that was written in JAMA that a parent, if they were Googling that they want to think about vaccinating their adolescent son for COVID, they would Google, and they're not a scientist or a clinician or a researcher, this would pop up. And the title is Myocarditis Cases Reported After mRNA-Based COVID-19 Vaccination in the US from December 2020 to August 2021. Now, remember, this was a real emotional time. People were afraid of whether or not they should vaccinate themselves, let alone vaccinate their adolescent son. So a mother could very well have Googled this, but that's a different audience. This article was written for other people that understand this. JAMA is not meant for the lay public. It's meant for other scientists. So if I was a parent looking at this, I would be reading this and I'd be getting a little nervous because I'm not seeing what I'm looking for. But if you go down to the 9th page of this article, the very, very bottom, The bottom line of this article is right there at the last sentence. This risk should be considered in the context of the benefits of COVID-19 vaccination. This is after the article is talking about all the risk and the parent, is seeing all the risk, but they didn't put it into context until the last sentence of the article. So now let's see how the New York Times would have handled the same exact article. And this is from November 4th, 2021. This is the lead that I spoke about, LEDE, the bottom line. They took what was written in that last sentence of JAMA and they put it right at the top because a mother who's looking to understand this article, this is what they care about. And they titled it, How Often Do COVID Vaccines Cause Heart Problems in Kids? The question I want to know as a parent, and the answer's right up top. The latest data is reassuring. Myocarditis remains very uncommon, and it is almost always mild and temporary. The heart risk from COVID-19 itself is far greater. I hope you can imagine how we flip that triangle. This is written in that orange triangle, bottom line up top. The JAMA article was the green triangle, which had the details first. So let's talk about jargon. And like I said, jargon has a purpose, right? If you want to convey information quickly to a colleague of yours or has deeper context with a particular word, it's appropriate to use jargon. But you should avoid jargon at all costs if you're speaking to an audience outside your discipline who won't understand those words. It will just be completely confusing. And here are examples of words that we use as health providers, scientists, educators all the time to audience outside our discipline. So a patient could get a diagnosis of a progressive disease, and they can think, wow, that's so cool. I have this cool progressive disease. Or positive test result. That could be good in some instances if you want to be pregnant and the test is positive, but it could also be not so good if you have a cancer diagnosis and it comes back positive. So we have to be careful with the words that we choose. Others are enhanced response. Basic research is one of my favorite. When they use that term with the lay public, the public's like, billions of dollars spent on research and we're still only on basics. What about, advanced research? So there are many, many more examples, but this is what we have to keep in mind when we want to avoid jargon. And here's an example of a scientific article that was published in Science. And again, an audience in science tends to understand this type of language. And I'm going to read it to you. The title is Sustaining Fisheries Yields Over Evolutionary Timescales. Fishery management plans ignore the potential for evolutionary change in harvestable biomass. We demonstrated experimentally that the continual removal of large phenotypes from exploited fish populations lead to the selection of genotypes that code for slower growth, thereby reducing the population yield and resiliency. Management tools that account for such Darwinian dynamics and preserve natural genetic variation are necessary for long-term sustainable yield. So if I were to ask a lay audience what they don't understand in this, I mean, there's plenty here, right? There's jargon, phenotype, genotype. There are concepts, Darwinian dynamics. There is plenty here that is losing the message, the lead for a lay audience. So we took a crack at writing it for a lay audience, and this is what we came up with. The title, Throw the Big Ones Back. So that basically, in a funny, humorous, way, tells you the bottom line of this example. And we can use a story, we can use an analogy to connect with an audience that doesn't understand this. So a story version would be the age-old common sense idea that fishermen should throw the small fish back while keeping the big ones was turned upside down by dramatic new results from a 5-year fishing experiment. The results showed that the removal of the largest fish has a ratcheting effect over time. As the parents keep getting smaller and smaller, so too do their children, eventually leading to populations of runts. So what's different about this? There's no jargon. They have an unexpected twist, right, in the story, which is something we spoke about. And they're able to connect using the format of a story. Here's an example of an analogy. Imagine you were a cattle farmer who every year sold his largest steers for market and used the smaller ones as parents for next year's herd. What would happen? Because children resemble their parents, inheritance, the cattle would get smaller. So too for over-harvested fish populations in the wild. So in this case, we use an analogy that most people can connect with. And they didn't use jargon, but when they could have said inheritance, but they chose to explain the term before they used it, which is okay. If you're going to use a term, explain it. And this is a way to connect with an audience that doesn't connect with that jargon in the previous example. So the use of vivid language, again, imagery, I was talking about a visual in your head. Sometimes you hear a song, an old song, and what do you conjure up in your mind? A memory, right? So we're trying to use that because it'll help somebody understand it, and you'll help you connect with the audience, and it will also be memorable. So here's a picture of a jellyfish, and we like this example. I don't know if you're familiar with Natalie Angier from the New York Times. This was a long time ago in 2011, but she's describing this, and she describes it as the jellyfish shimmered and glowed with its tendrils retracted. It looked like a round bar of glycerin soap, or maybe a translucent diaphragm, and it felt equal parts firm, jiggly, and slimy, like a slice of liver coated in raw egg. So not only is this language evocative, but I'm feeling it, right? I can imagine it. And it's compelling and it's memorable. Here's another example for use of analogy or metaphor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book. It's been out a while. I don't have the year on here, but it's fabulous. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And it was about a woman who was treated, I think it was at Johns Hopkins, and had some remnant cells of her uterus that they ended up saving, and they realized it could grow on its own. It was very hard to make cell lines like this. And years and years later, it's probably decades later, there are so many of those cells that have grown and are being used for research today. So how do we even describe the magnitude of that, right? How unbelievable that is. So here's an analogy. If you gather all the cells that grew from that one little sample, they would weigh more than 50 million metric tons, more than 150 Empire State Buildings. So this allows a listener to really understand how many that is. Now, notice she didn't stop at 50 million metric tons, because that may be really hard to imagine. But then she added 150 Empire State Buildings. Well, now I know that's a heck of a lot of cells.
I love that example. Another one we talked about was the technique of putting a face on it, if possible. Science is filled with technical terminology and even naming of things that can be very confusing. So here's an example that I love. I don't know if you know who this is, AL228-1. I for sure didn't. I'm guessing a lot of people don't know this the identity of this person by this name, but they likely do by the name of Lucy. I'm sure that you've heard of Lucy. She was the hominin that was discovered in 1974. And the scientists were so excited about this discovery that they danced that night in the camp and they played the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And somebody, that nobody can remember who, ended up giving her that name. And, arguably, she is the most well-known hominin of all discovery. And you could argue that that's from the amount of her that was discovered, but it's also because we've given her an identity that many of us can relate to just in the form of a name. So think about that. If there's a way of putting a face on your research, that really matters. So we have thrown a whole bunch of really big ideas at you. And in order to help you remember and organize your own thoughts, we have created a tool called the Big Idea Form. And Norma is going to put that form in the chat so you can download and you can work for the rest of this session on your own elevator pitch as we're working with Gary on his. So you can go ahead and download that now. And then I'm going to bring the slide deck down. And so we can talk to you, Gary. We're going to welcome you back to our session here. Thank you. Gary has gone through this process a number of times with us as a team. And so we thought we would use his elevator pitch as a model to think about how to use this form and adjust and adapt it. So before we get to the form, Gary, why don't you go ahead and just set this pitch up for us, who you would be delivering this to, and then give it a go.
Okay, sure. So the context here is that I'm talking to a nursing leader. We'll call her Barbara. Her name is Barbara. And I'm trying to get her to support rolling out my project we did it on a couple of units and we'd like to expand it to the rest of the hospital. So here's me approaching her, maybe in the hallway is where I would see the hallway of the hospital is probably where I would run into her.
Great.
So Barbara, I was wondering if I could tell you just quickly about something that I'm working on with a couple of nurses. I know both of us really care about boosting the morale of especially the nurses and adding meaning and value to their work as they work with really challenging patients. And I love doing that, making that connection through meaningful pictures if possible. And that's a project that we've been working on. I've been working with a couple of nurses. And we've actually, we've had patients choose a picture, or if they can't, a loved one choose a picture that best represents how they like to be seen by the healthcare teams. And then we print that, put it in a frame on their bedside stand. And then for actually about a couple of years on those 2 units, you may have heard about this project. We measured, what the impact was of that on both the nursing staff and the patients. And we found really positive outcomes on both sides. We found positive outcomes for the patients, giving more dignity, giving them more dignity, and for the nurses, really helping them add meaning and value to their work. An example of that was a patient about my age who I saw. I walked into the room and he had a picture. And so I asked him about the picture and he said, oh, my wife actually chose that picture. I wasn't able to when I came into the hospital. And it was a picture of him playing the guitar. And I asked him about it. He said, yeah, my wife chose that because I'm most calm and comfortable when I'm surrounded by music or with music. And she knows me playing the guitar is really just my happy place. And that just opened up like great communication between him and me about his relationship with his wife and music. And so, for me, it was like walking into the room and like, if you're stumbling into a dark room and feeling for the light switch, the picture was like the light coming on in the room, changing a sterile environment to something warm and welcoming. So I hope we can count on your support to really, it's been so effective on these 2 units. We want to roll it out to the rest of the hospital. We're going to need, more printers and paper, lots of ink, that's the lots of printer ink. And so I hope we can meet to talk about this more. And in the meantime, I want you to think about a picture of your own, something maybe you have at home that has a lot of meaning and value to you. And if you were sick and put that on your bedside stand, what messages might that convey about you to the healthcare team?
Awesome. Great job. Thank you so much, Gary. That was terrific. So for those who were listening, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, think about that message that you just heard. What aspect of that would you remember tonight at dinner to tell somebody that you were eating dinner with? What would you remember to be able to share with them? I'm not looking at the chat right now, Yvonne, so maybe you can let me know if people have ideas from that. What would you remember from that talk? I know for me what, yeah, Corinne, let me think about what photo I would want shared at my bedside. Yeah, me too. Doctors enjoy playing guitar, emotional power of the photo for the nurses, the example. Yeah, great. Helping medical personnel deal with and how to transform their experience to keep their level empathy high and functioning. Great. So I want to point out here the very moving idea of a patient putting up a photo of themselves. I want to point out here that what you're remembering is largely the emotion. And that is great because that hits the center of our brain that does evoke memory. But it's also something that's helpful to Gary to think about to help him recognize that this is a valuable part of that pitch. So when we're thinking about an elevator pitch, we're thinking about a really tight 1 to 2 minute message. And this message that you gave was probably more in the 4-minute range. I wasn't timing it myself, but it was a little long. And I will say to the audience here, we did work on this beforehand. So Gary knew he was probably going to be speaking too long right out of the gate, and that's fine because we wanted to show how this process works. So let me share the slides again and illustrate how he used the big idea form to get him to this important message. Okay, you have you're able to see the slides again now, correct? Yeah. Okay. So the big idea form begins with audience, and this is really important, as Yvonne stated. Your message needs to be catered not just to what you're doing, but to what they're interested in, so that you're automatically thinking about common ground. So Gary, just talk us through these first 4 categories. Who's your audience? Why is it important to them? Who are you, and why do you care? So let's just talk through that bit of the big idea form.
Sure. Yeah, so my audience in this situation, I'm trying to gain, support from a nursing leader. Honestly, we're collegial, but I wouldn't say close. We're friendly, and I would probably run into her in a hallway. And her schedule is very busy. I think she cares about patient satisfaction. We all do, of course, but I know she's also concerned about nursing morale, and how challenging the job is, and has been a bedside nurse herself, so it really understands that. And I'm a doctor who sees the most probably sick patients in the hospital, the most ill. This person, Barbara, knows that I am part of a team that has helped with improving quality indicators other quality indicators in the hospital. So I think probably she values that. And I did work with nurses on this project, so I wanted to make sure to highlight that. And I care about this topic. I'm really passionate about it because honestly, I observe a lot of communication that doesn't go well, and where providers and patients really are not making a meaningful connection, and it's all about, you know, the task at hand. So our team noticed that before this project, when there were pictures in the room, when patients chose to put them in the room or their families, that it was an opening for our team to make nice connections and ask some questions. So that's where the idea sprang from.
I love that. And I just want to illustrate here that your particular pitch lends itself to emotional connection. So these whys, why it's important to them and why it's important to you, were kind of low-hanging fruit. This way, you didn't have to dig too hard to get there. But I will say that we've worked with many researchers, particularly those who are working in basic research, who have a really hard time with this question. And this particular part of the document is important to address. We get so close to our work sometimes that we can't see the forest for the trees. And these fields are intended to help you slow down and step back and really look about why you care about this. Even if it's just something like, I am somebody who, you know, my jam is understanding what makes the world work. I am a curious person, and that's deeply interesting to me. You don't have to have the answers to everything, but you do need to address why you care, because that's going to inform the language that you choose and the way that you choose to connect to that audience member. So in the form, as you're thinking about filling this out for yourself, pay very, very close attention to these first 4 fields, because they're going to inform both your audience's connection and your connection to this topic. The next field we have is about goal. And when you're thinking about your goal, it has to be not your long-term personal goal, but what is your goal for this conversation? And that has to be actionable, because you're trying to get the audience to think, feel, or do something different as a result of the conversation. So this is an audience-centric goal. It's not about your personal life goal or your goal in your research. So Gary, talk us through the goal that you had here.
Yeah, well, Val helped me narrow this further, because she asked me, well, if you really only had a couple minutes in the hallway, what's a realistic goal? And so I think in that sense, the goal is not really to get Barbara to buy into the project and support the project, rather just to get another meeting with Barbara.
Yeah.
So this was an ambitious goal for really the scenario that's likely to occur.
Right. And actually, this is a great goal for the next meeting, maybe, right?
Right.
Like your
Right.
elevator pitch could be narrowed down more. And that's what whoops, sorry, I'm trying to advance the slides. That's what we tried to do in this. We narrowed it down so that that we're trying to think about just generating enthusiasm with the nurse leader to be willing to invest her time to get into the details later about how to expand the idea. So really, time is, I can't stress this enough, time is everything in relation to your goal. If it's, ask yourself that 3 times, can I really accomplish this in the amount of time that I have? And when your answer is yes, you probably know you've got a good goal. And then the form takes us to the big picture. And Gary sort of illustrated that in his pitch, describing some of the way that the first experiment worked, some of the ways that impacted both the patients and the team. And you wrote that in a nice, concise way here. I don't know if you have anything else that you might want to say about that, Gary, but we've written this part of the form almost as a Mad Lib. Consider beginning with language like I, or our team are trying to, or we wondered if. And we left the field intentionally small because we don't want you going on and on here. We want you to be concise with your language. Gary, is there anything else that you have to add on this?
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay, cool. And then this is the novel thing that you're working on. And Gary, I loved what you wrote here. Pictures add warmth to a sterile environment. And think about the opposite in those language. I mean, in that language, we have warmth and cold here. So this is, like Yvonne was referencing, something that you can feel. It's a sensory kind of an image that we can imagine. So I love the language that you use here. This is a tricky field for many researchers that we've worked with, because science is about teamwork. None of us are solving any problems on our own, and we have a hard time articulating what makes us stand apart from others. Because, you know, my experience with thousands of scientists is that you are a humble bunch. But this is an opportunity for you to step back and go, wait a second, this is an important thing, and be able to champion that for yourself and your team, because that really matters to the listener, is why this is different or unique from what other people are doing. So, you know, you may have to dig on this one, but I encourage you to do so. Gary, do you have anything to add here? I feel like I'm sort of taking over a little bit.
No, I think you got it.
I got it. Terrific. Okay, great. Okay, so the next part of the form is two parts: thinking of an example and then thinking of an analogy. And some of you in the poll about stuff you remembered, most of you remembered the example. That was very, very resonant. And he used this analogy. Gary, talk to us a little bit about the analogy you used. And as Gary's talking, if you have other analogies that sprang to mind, feel free to keep those or pop those in the chat, because we always like to mine the wisdom of the room. So Gary, tell us about this analogy or metaphor.
Sure. Yeah, the example was easy, honestly, because it came to mind very quickly. I remembered that patient, but the analogy I did struggle with more. I like to think of, you know, the palliative care work that I do as a team with others, that we try to bring some lightness, some, you know, light to very dark situations. And so that came to mind as, you know, that's what the pictures were doing, and opening up, you know, conversations that provided connection and that warmth. So I don't know if it's the best analogy, but that's what I thought of. So would love other ideas if anyone wants to share.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, in your particular research project, it's pretty easy to imagine. So I think, especially if you're thinking of whittling down to a shorter time frame for an elevator pitch, because the room is saying that they really connected with the example, let's, for our purposes, leave the analogy out in this one. This area of the form is the one that people struggle with the most. The analogy is hard because an analogy is not the thing itself, and we run the risk of feeling like that's dumbing it down or making it into something that it's not. What an analogy does is it provides a bridge. It's a bridge to something, that an unknown space that we don't know, but we can get there through another path that we do know. And so that's why analogy is very important. especially if you have something complicated or something that you can't imagine. The way a cell works, or some component of the universe that we can't even see in a dark matter, right? Like stuff that you can't, string theory, stuff you can't even imagine. This is where analogy and metaphor are really helpful to the listener to help us come along in that message. It is also the most skipped part of this form from participants that we have worked with. Don't skip it. Even if it's something that you're not going to use, be disciplined and make yourself do it, because you never know. I call it back pocket language. You never know when that might be helpful for you to bring out and share with a new audience. And it's helpful if you've put in the work to kind of examine that. This next bit, how will the world change? Again, this is hard for researchers sometimes. Gary, you included some nice language here. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where the passion does come from, part in part, imagining the ripple effects. And while it sounds very easy, there were some struggles to actually implement this project. But it is something that could definitely roll out further, could roll out to other hospitals or institutions. The team had, the idea that it could, the electronic health record, the picture that's chosen there could be a bit of a different prompt for how people go about choosing their picture. So it's fun to think about all of the, the potential ripple effects and next steps. But those would require next steps.
Yeah, sure. It's nothing is easy, right? And but the language that you've chosen, dignity, joy, meaning, right? These are audacious and important goals, and also attainable with what your experiment showed. So it's important to recognize the value of what it is that you're doing, and really think about the impact that you're trying to create. I know that can be complicated, especially in basic research. You don't want to oversell. You don't want to say, this corner of biology that I'm working on has the potential to cure cancer, right? Like we've heard that many times, haven't we, Yvonne? Of, I can't say those words. Right. You can't say those words if they're not true. But find the words that you think you could say. We are hopeful that our work can help impact other teams who are also working on, XYZ. Do you know what I'm saying? So try to think boldly about the language that you're using without feeling like you're pushing it into overselling. And here's maybe one of the most important of the other than audience. This may be one of the most important fields. And you see how tiny this field is? That's also intentional, because we want you to come up with one sentence, maybe two sentences, to really drive the point home. When you're thinking about like how things are sold, like in a television commercial, for example, many times they end with a jingle, right? And that's intentional, because that, even if the message of the commercial hasn't stuck, that melody will. Bum, ba, bum, bum. We remember those jingles whether we want to or not. And Gary, I'm not going to ask you to come up with a jingle for this, although, maybe offline we'll brainstorm about that. But as Yvonne was saying, using vivid language to really distill your message and drive home your point is really important. And one of the or a couple of the people, I think, in the chat remembered your last message. So Say it again for us, just so that it's brought to our mind.
Yeah, just asking Barbara for her to think about a picture that she might choose, so that she could be seen, or to think about how she might want to be seen by healthcare providers, which is interesting. Working on this project, I'm thinking about that all the time. Actually, what photo would I choose? So this really stuck for me.
Yeah, it really stuck for me too as a listener. You know, I thought of a couple of photos for myself, but more than that, I thought of a photo for my dad, who is 94 and has been in the hospital quite frequently, um, and is also really never identifies as being a patient. And so it's complicated for him emotionally being in the hospital. And so I immediately had a photo of him spring to mind. And what I love about this ending is that it created, not only in the listener that you were, you know, hopefully speaking to, but probably in all of us, we probably all thought of a picture immediately, because this is a call to action kind of an ending. It doesn't tie things up in a neat bow. It makes us think more evocatively. So that's a great technique, if you're trying to think of how you want something to end. Um, before we before we go on to this last bit of our slide deck, we've kind of gone through your big idea form. We've narrowed down your goal so that it's more attainable as an elevator pitch. Your goal is just to get the next meeting now, and we're weeding out the analogy. So let's give you another shot at doing this pitch and see if we can tighten the time and you know, keep the elements that were strong.
Okay, I'll give it a go.
Okay, awesome.
Um, uh, Barbara, if I could have just a couple minutes, I'd like to tell you quickly about a project that uh, really boosted morale for the nurses and really helped providers and patients connect in a more meaningful way. Just an example from the project was a patient that I saw. I went into the room. There was a picture, a framed picture on his bedside stand, and it was a picture of him playing the guitar. So I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, my wife actually chose that picture for me because, I couldn't choose it when I was hospitalized. I was too out of it." And I said, "Well, why do you think, she chose that picture?" And he said, "Well, because I love music, and she knows music helps me feel calm and comfortable, and playing the guitar is my happy place, and she knows that about me." And that just opened up all sorts of great lines of communication between him and me about his relationships with music and his wife. And so that's just an example from the project, was actually having people or their loved ones, if they can't choose a picture that best represents how they like to be seen by the healthcare team. And then it would be printed and put on their bedside stand. We did that in a couple of units, and we got amazing results. I'd love to tell you more about it, and because I'd love to roll it out to the rest of the hospital. If I could just, get some more time with you. Great. So, yeah, in the meantime, if you could try to think about a picture you might choose, that would help a healthcare team see who you are. And then I'll ask you about it when we meet.
Love it. Vaughn, do you have some feedback for Gary on this?
Yeah. Did you time that, Val?
I didn't. No, sorry, I didn't time it.
Yeah. I mean, it sounded about half the
Yeah.
length and kept my attention throughout. I love the way you bookended making it about her. So, Gary, what was your opening line again?
Uh,
Besides, I need your time or whatever.
yeah, I tried to do a quick headline of just that there was a project, but really focusing on the fact that it did boost the nursing morale, which I think she cares about quite a bit.
Yeah. So again, you did two things that we spoke about, knowing who your audience is, number one, right? Because as a nurse manager or at her level, that really should matter to her, right? So you addressed that right out of the gate and made it about her, not about you. And you ended it with an ask, for her to do something and connect with her on an emotional level. So you bookended it, and that was very memorable. So you really did a good job of knowing who your audience was. And also, it's not only about her. Why you care is also really interesting to listen to, and compelling, and that was clear. What did this process do for you, Gary?
Yeah, this process and going through the form and getting feedback has been really helpful. I mean, it's one of the components of our faculty fellowship that was transformational for me. When I was preparing presentations, or I would think about the audience, but I would just start creating PowerPoint slides in the way that you described. We read medical articles with all of the details first. And that's, I think, how we all kind of grow up in science and healthcare, is really getting to know those details, and that's how we're successful. So this form really helps me think much more carefully about the audience, much more carefully about how I can connect with the audience and hopefully share the passion about my topic. So it's been really helpful, not just for quick elevator pitches, but for presentations as well.
Thanks, Gary. That was great.
I just have a couple more slides to share with you, and then we can open this up to a little Q&A if there's any interest in that. So, just thinking about audience, even in the form that Gary already filled out, if he just changed the audience, it might make him use different aspects of the form in different orders. And if you see at the bottom of the form, it says, you don't have to use all of this. You can pick and choose. The idea is that it helps you organize your thoughts so that you're able to be spontaneous and reactive to your audience. So Gary, you came up with another potential audience for this kind of a pitch of a philanthropist. Do you want to talk us through who this person might be?
Yeah, I thought of this because this was actually a real scenario. It's how our palliative care team at UCSD got a significant source of philanthropy because of a bad experience that a loved one had, a person had with their loved one who was hospitalized, and they were very motivated to help make it better for others. And so I saw that in line with this project, that this, people might be interested, who could support that. So by making the hospital a more warm and inviting place, as opposed to so sterile.
Yeah. And in thinking about this audience, we won't go through the whole form again, but what aspects do you think might you reorder or change around a little bit if you were pitching to this this funder?
Yeah, good question. I think I might start with an imagine this person's spouse. What if they had a picture? How might that have changed the interactions? Because I know for a fact that they didn't have a photo at the bedside. So I might start with that, have them think of a picture, and then maybe try to imagine how that maybe could have changed some of the interactions and improved some connection. Because the concern was, the patient wasn't being seen as a whole a whole person, a whole, that their goals weren't necessarily being honored in the best way possible. So maybe a picture could have helped with that and engaged, some conversation around other aspects of their life. So I think I might start with the, imagine.
Yeah, I love that. And essentially what you're doing is you're starting with your closing. You're bringing that right up to the top
Right.
and making that person's loved one the example even. So I love that idea and how you're thinking of that. So it's just another illustration of how the form can be useful for you to rethink the exact same message in a different context. So we hope this process has been helpful for you. We've laid out a whole bunch of stuff and we've given you a tool. We've had Gary demonstrate the tool and given some more direction surrounding it. Because this is a webinar, we can't make it as interactive as we like many of our sessions to be. So we thought we would invite you back if you're interested and have time to come to another session on just like a practice session for you of what you've learned today on June 9th from 8 to 9 in the morning Pacific time. And what you would do in that session, you would come with your big idea form all filled out. We would talk a little bit as a larger group, and then we would go into small breakout groups, and you would be there with one or two other colleagues who didn't know you, didn't know your work, and we would give you some opportunities to practice your pitch and then get a little facilitation, a few facilitation or feedback from your listeners. I like to call them innocent ears, people who already don't have the curse of knowledge of you or your work, and they can often, give you ideas that you hadn't considered before that can be very valuable. So that's an opportunity that's available. There's a QR code if you'd like to access the sign up form. And I think Norma is also going to send out an email for you to sign up if you're interested in that opportunity. That would be a Zoom session, so you would need to be on camera for that session, just as a heads up.
She also put it in the chat.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks, Norma. And then if you've enjoyed this process, we also have two courses on Coursera. Our course called Communicating with the Public. You've engaged today with the big idea. We've basically done that part of our course together. There's another module called Finding the Story. And while the big idea is about that, flipping that triangle so you get your main idea to the top, story evolves over time and includes conflict and twists and turns. So it's a little different structure that can be used for other purposes. So that's another opportunity for you to think about different ways of communicating your message. And then if you are in clinical practice, we have a series called A New Framework in Healthcare Communication. And this is very story-based. We begins with Yvonne's story as a patient who underwent 21 surgeries over the course of 30 years. And we use her story in Foundations in Compassion. We use a cancer patient's story in Speaking Plainly. It follows many of the same trajectories as what you've engaged with here, but with a clinical context. Narrative humility is a way of thinking about differences in culture and perspectives in story and in inclusivity in our lives and in our work. And then we wrap up with the clinical story. One of Gary's palliative care colleagues, Katie Winters, helps facilitate that and shares a story of her own struggles to be willing to stay in the room when delivering serious news, and the heaviness that creates in clinicians, and it's quite a moving module. So I hope that you'll consider engaging with those.
And this was our inaugural Zoom workshop, and we're going to start offering them monthly in September. Here is a list of some of the topics. Mediation skills in September, preparing for a media interview in October with a good friend of ours, former CBS News Vice President Marcy McGinnis. This will help you with media interviews. In November, it's making your voice heard, writing letters to the editor and op-eds. Also, another good friend of ours, a journalist, to help you talk and hopefully write a letter to the editor or op-ed. And in December, another good friend of ours, our poet in residence, Thomas Dooley, doing a session on hearing myself think. It's a very, very powerful session. Also, not just communication, but wellness as well. And the QR code is here. And Norma's put it in the chat, and she will also send it in the email that she's going to send all of you. And last but not least, so in January, we started a series called Lead with Compassion. And it's our way of sharing, scaling out of UCSD along with these workshops to reach other institutions and other people. And we had about 40 people attend our first session in San Diego. So we're offering another one April 8th through 9th, 2026. Plenty of time to book your tickets to sunny San Diego. And it'll be a 2-day workshop. It's very interactive, involves role plays, involves meeting people from different disciplines. And here is the QR code. And again, Norma will send that in an email and listed it in the chat. And is that our last slide?
Oh, I think
Yeah.
that's our last slide.
So I
did you
think
want-
we answered some questions already, the ones that were posed in the chat. And we can open it up now to questions. We'd be happy to answer.
Someone had raised their hand earlier. I don't know, Norma, if you caught that.
Yeah, but then they put it down.
Okay.
Are people able to see questions from everybody in this format?
Yes, unless they decide to share it anonymously.
Okay.
But
There was a great question about how do we know when we're using jargon?
I responded in the chat to everybody, but for those of you that didn't see it, so inheritance isn't the most egregious use of a word that's considered jargon, but it does help you. We really just want you to think about every word you choose and say, is this something my audience would understand or not? I would imagine most of the audience would understand what inheritance means, but you need to stop and think about it. And how do you know a word is jargon? You could test it out on a representative of the audience. So if you're talking to the lay people, speak to somebody outside of your discipline, see if they understand that term. And the way we've learned over the 15 years is trial by, trial, fire, whatever that saying is, but we learn it in the moment, and we'll fix it next time if people don't understand it. But and also they will, ask questions in the moment if they need clarification.
and also I want to mention that it is recorded, so the recording will be shared to your email. So just expect to receive that soon.
Yeah, and if you have others that you think would benefit from the video, we'd love you to help spread the word and help expand the audience if you have that availability.
Yeah, I don't see any more additional questions. So you guys you'll all know how to reach us because Norma's going to reach out to you. And we really do appreciate you attending today and hope to see you at any of our future ones.
Thank you for
Thank you
coming.
everyone for joining.
I think we can stop the